This guy is the strongest healer in the whole continent. In the final battle against the calamity, none of the hunters were strong enough to finish off the dragons. But they had will, and with will around, no one died on the battlefield, no matter how serious the injuries were. But that turned out to be a curse. His allies got fed up with not being able to die. Being rescued from death, patched up from scratch, and thrown back into the war again and again was worse than simply falling in battle. So they turned against the only one who was keeping them alive. The general stabbed a sword into Will's shoulder and said, "Now you know what it feels like to suffer." That was the end. With no will to fight, the army fell apart. The dragons did not let anyone get away. And Will found out that not even the strongest healer in the world comes out alive from a dragon's stomach. But do you think that's all? Will wakes up 5 years earlier with all the memories of the apocalypse still in his head. He knows exactly what's coming. And this time he decided that he won't just stay behind healing people. He'll learn out of Rick. He'll join the offensive magic academy and stop depending on others to protect the people he cares about until he notices the letter on the table. The registration form. If it was there, it meant that he had actually gone back in time. Will opens the door and looks out at the world outside. Year 416 of the Sulsario calendar, 1 week before the registration date at High League Academy 5 years ago. He had thought that the dragon had taken his life. He doesn't know what happened, but if his last wish was really granted, then he knows exactly what he must do. He will enroll in Schwartz, the offensive magic academy. It was common knowledge that healers could not use attack magic. Will intended to shatter that notion once and for all. There would be obstacles, many of them, but he carried the memories of his past life and all the healing magic he had mastered in it. If he used everything he had, he could change the future. This time he would fight with his own hands. Schwartz was the best school in the world to learn battle magic. They said that the elite system there could turn any mage into a frontline fighter. Someone he had met in his past life was also a graduate, but the academy's theories were kept secret. Only students had access to them. There probably wasn't any precedent for a healer enrolling in Schwartz. The question was how to sort that out. In the end, it might all come down to money. Because of the school's reputation, the nobles invested a lot in it. If only he had managed to recover his fortune from his past life. But more. In any case, the reward he received as a healer was generous. The problem was time. Even if he started working now, he wouldn't earn enough before the enrollment date. A voice calls his name. Will immediately recognizes his sister. What anonymously to his system? He had returned to the past and she was still alive. She asks him if his stomach was working. Will shakes his head, saying that some dust got into his eye. She laughs and wishes him a good day. Will thinks that in this life, he'll be able to avoid the tragedy that will happen to her later. His healing magic would be enough. He can save the people he couldn't save before. He says that he discovered something. His sister wants to know what is going on. The Magic Academy Alliance was an organization that brought together all the academies in the kingdom and made decisions about magical education. At that time, the president of the alliance was also serving as the principal of Schwartz Academy, but there was a period when he practically disappeared from the meetings. That very day at the principal's estate, he was beside a bed. His granddaughter lay unconscious, drenched in cold sweat. He rests his hand on her face and calls her Marie. He says that today's healer was not good enough either, but that he'll find someone capable of curing her. He asked her to hold on a little longer. That is why the president kept disappearing. He was completely consumed by caring for his sick granddaughter. In the previous timeline, the healing magic of that era could not save her, and she died. Then someone enters through the window and asks if the director would be willing to let him take on that job. The director recognizes the boy immediately. It was Will, the scholarship student from High Lake, whose talent in healing magic was well known within the alliance. Although he did not expect him to be the type to enter through windows, Will scratches his head and laughs. He thinks that his past self would never have done something like this, but losing a life might have made him bolder. In any case, there is no time to lose. Not for him, not for the girl, and he can heal her. The director asks what his intentions are. Will says they can talk about that later and that first he needs permission to treat his granddaughter. The illnesses progress faster than he expected. The two of them stare at each other for a few seconds. Then the director gives in and tells Will to show him what he has got. Will sits down next to the girl on the bed and looks ahead, a bit tense. He thinks that the director of an offensive magic academy has exactly the kind of eyes you would expect. The kind that would end your life on the spot if you make a wrong move. Even so, he takes a deep breath, holds her hand and begins to use his healing magic. His mana capacity decreased when he returned to the past, but he still remembers the formulas. The formula to treat Zora's illness was not supposed to be discovered for another 2 years, but his current self already knows it and the girl opens her eyes. Will lets out a sigh of relief and says, "Thank God it worked." With a smile, he tells her that her energy is completely drained and asks her to rest. She turns away a bit embarrassed and agrees. The director asks if Marie is really alright. She confirms it and says she can't remember the last time she felt this lightness. The old man almost bursts into tears on the spot. He says he understands. He completely understands, and that is a huge relief. In another room, the director thanks Will. He says that if there is anything he can do for him, all he has to do is ask. Will thanks him and says that the request is not a difficult one. As the director has just seen, his healing magic is top-notch. So there's nothing left for him to learn in that field. That is why he wants to enroll in the Schwarz Academy. The director asks if Will really wants to put a talent like his in an offensive magic academy instead of a healing one, and if he understands what that means. Will confirms it. The director studies the boy's eyes for a moment. Then he says that his authority exists precisely for days like this and that he'll take care of everything. He shakes Will's hand. In another room, a man comments that this old fox, just when you least expect it, goes and does something so reckless. He wonders if Will, a soft healer like him, will even be able to keep up with the Schwarz curriculum. On the day of the entrance ceremony, the director gives a speech in front of everyone. The academy's Schwarz Academy is a boarding school specializing in offensive magic, with a unique curriculum, vast grounds, numerous training fields, research facilities, and a huge library. It has influential students and receives direct support from the kingdom. There is no better institution to learn offensive magic. No healer had ever enrolled there before. The director is certain that many difficulties await Will. But if he studies at this academy, he can become a true magician. Will thinks about his past. Here, in this place, he'll change his destiny. After the registration and classes begin, Will encounters his first obstacle. A teacher tells him to bling. Will agrees. He conjures a fire spell in the palm of his hand and fires it, but only smoke comes out. The teacher declares it another failure. He says he cannot allow Will to attend class until he can hit a target with basic offensive magic, and tells him to go practice at the training fields behind the school. Will apologizes and asks if the teacher can at least show him how to do it. There's no way to practice something he does not know. The teacher replies that teaching a healer is nothing but a waste of time. Will asked if he could at least study theory in the library, but the teacher was blunt. There were no books for healers there. That was when a blonde student suddenly cast a spell without warning and shot it straight at him. It would hit the ground. The blonde laughed and asked if he couldn't even dodge a basic attack. This was an academy for offensive magic. There was no place for the weak who didn't even know how to protect themselves. In other words, it was his own fault for getting hit. The teacher agreed with the student. He said that Will should ask the Healers Academy to take him back. The blonde Olpis finished with a smile, saying that at least there he would find people kind enough to comfort him. Will stood up and looked back with hatred on his face. Later, sitting on a bench outside, Will faced reality. There were no signs of progress in offensive magic. He knew it would be difficult. Healing magic and offensive magic come from completely different sources. Mages convert mana using spell formulas, and the type of mana defines what they can do. Dynamic mana produces fire, explosions, destruction. Healers only possess static mana, but Schwarz had a reputation for forging top-class battle mages out of almost nothing. There had to be some method here. If he could learn to convert static mana into dynamic, he was sure he could master the rest. The problem was that it wasn't even possible to get close to the classes. Professors and students alike looked down on healers. Even so, he couldn't give up. The person he admired had started with little mana and had refined everything right here in Schwartz. Coming here hadn't been a mistake. Fighting in the dark wouldn't get him anywhere either. He didn't have permission to enter the library, but maybe it was worth trying to sneak in. A voice broke the silence, asking what he was doing outside at that hour. Will apologized automatically and then recognized the person standing in front of him. She came closer, looked down, then lifted her eyes and met Will's gaze directly. It was Lady Veronica. He felt the weight of that encounter. In his previous life, they had fought on the same battlefield. She was a first-class battle mage, and in the final moments, they had been together. A magic sword could cut through anything in an instant. And now, in this life, he had the chance to meet her again. It was then that he realized. She had a sword in hand. Veronica said she had seen a suspicious student and that it was only natural to be on guard. She wanted to know what he was up to, whether he was plotting something or simply eager to learn. Will assessed the situation in a split second. Veronica was on a completely different level compared to LP's. If she attacked, he was finished. He replied that it was just enthusiasm. She sheathed her sword, then said it was alright. Will confirmed his name and Veronica agreed, but she wanted to know if that was how one addressed a teacher. Will was surprised. In his previous life, the age gap between them hadn't been so wide. Veronica explained that she had skipped grades and had become a teacher shortly after, from that very year onwards. Given her talent, it made a lot of sense, and that was when Will saw the opportunity. He asked her if he could attend her classes and how he could enroll. Veronica replied that she still didn't have her own class. She had skipped grades and hardly attended regular classes. That year, she was only a teaching assistant, assigned to answer students' questions. The idea was that since she was of a similar age, the students would feel more comfortable with her. However, for some reason, nobody asked her anything. Perfect. Will got straight to the point. If a healer wanted to learn offensive magic, what did she think he should do? Veronica said that she had noticed something strange in his mana flow, so it was him, the newcomer everyone had been talking about. A healer learning offensive magic was something rare, but if there was any method to handle dynamic mana, she could certainly teach him. Will was surprised, but Veronica continued without hesitation. Even so, it would be impossible for him to use offensive magic. He had too much static mana. Even if he managed to forge dynamic mana, it would simply dissolve into the static. And even by using an alternative method, the formula would not work. Will asked directly if there was no method for a healer to use offensive magic. Veronica said no. He took in the answer. The plan had fallen apart, but giving up was not an option. If there was no method, he would have to create one himself. He thanked Veronica and said he would think about it more on his own. Veronica said that she hadn't finished yet. It was true that healers could not use offensive magic, but there was a way for a healer to become a battle mage. Will didn't understand what she meant by that. Veronica pointed to the sword at her waist. Move it like this and you can defeat an enemy. Then she pointed to the chair beside her, made of wood, built for sitting. But if someone were to pick it up and threw it at another person, it would easily knock them down. No one thinks of using a chair as a weapon because it is made for something else. How it is used depends on who is holding it, and the same was true for her hand. She could give a gentle touch. Will was caught by surprise. Then Veronica gave him a tap on the forehead and told him that she could also hurt him that way. In short, it all came down to how it was applied. Anything could become a weapon depending on how it was used. Will understood it immediately. She was talking about using healing magic to attack. Veronica confirmed it by nodding. He couldn't understand why he had never thought of that before. He hadn't even considered that possibility. Veronica explained that this was exactly what defined the nature of each person. That is why battle mages had no interest in healing and healers had no interest in combat. But probably he was different. The mere fact that he had enrolled in an offensive magic academy already made him an anomaly. And actually his mana was not that of a pure healer. Will thought that maybe he hadn't realized it because of the regression. Veronica told him to be aware of that, to embrace the aggressive fury within him. If he did so, his healing magic would surely be able to crush his enemies. The next day, at the training ground, Will was still thinking about what Veronica had said. Her analogy had been strange, but it really opened my eyes. He wondered why she hadn't shown any resistance to the idea of a healer using offensive magic, and it was odd that she already had a theory ready for it. The instructor interrupted his thoughts. Since the class had an odd number of students, Will would also be taking part in the training bouts that day. The fact that he couldn't use offensive magic was his own problem. Even if he ended up getting beaten one-sidedly, he would have to reap what he sowed, and the matchups had already been decided. Will would be facing Ulpis. It was an obvious setup. Alpais Omen came from a well-known noble family and was always surrounded by lackeys. But from what Will had observed in class, Alpis was not just any man, he was a proper battle mage. Alpis shouted that healing magic won't work against humiliation and that Will would run home crying after getting thrashed. Will found his personality irritating in a way he hadn't expected. In the past he would have ignored it, but this time the fellow really got on his nerves. He wanted to test Veronica's theory anyway, and maybe fight back a little. He formally addressed Ulpes and told him that he would not accept a loss. Will replied that he had no intention of giving up but that he had a proposal. If he lost the fight, he would admit that he had no talent for offensive magic and would leave Schwartz. The instructor said that it was a wise decision. Will went on. But if he won, he wanted permission to attend regular classes. The instructor asked what kind of nonsense that was. Ulpis shouted that a weakling was clinging to an impossible illusion just to cope with his fear, and that if there was nothing to break, there would be no fun in it. Estidas. The instructor closed the discussion. Impossible hypotheses were a waste of time. Both should take their positions. He raised his hand and asked for the game to begin. Alpius focused and summoned several daggers around him. He shouted at Will to behold the creation magic of his sword. Countless swords conjured out of thin air, ready to strike at a deserter who couldn't even use basic offensive magic. Will focused right after, channeled his healing magic, opened his eyes with complete concentration and began dodging the swords from side to side. Ulpius was taken aback. Will pondered as he moved. The true essence of his healing magic was the manipulation of life, controlling vital activity and maximizing the body's natural healing power. But healing wasn't the only thing he could control. If he turned that into an offensive form, Ulpius would shout at him to stop acting as if he was something special just because he got lucky. Will activated physical reinforcement, grabbed one of the swords in the air and with a single movement knocked down all the others. They froze, suspended for a moment before falling to the ground with a dull thud. That was exactly what he needed. He placed the dagger in front of him and said he was just borrowing it. He was ready to fight. The crowd had no idea what had just happened. Someone asked if that was offensive magic. Will thought it wasn't. It was healing magic used in an offensive way. Apparently, no one else could tell the difference. Ulpis did not agree. He shouted that Will had to be joking, that he could summon many more swords than those. A battle mage couldn't lose to a healer. Will kept going, deflecting every sword that came at him. Ulpis got even more frustrated. He said it wasn't about quantity and declared he would make the swords bigger. He wanted to see what Will thought about that. Will blocked with a bag off. Ulpis shouted in disbelief and pushed harder. He added a spin to the blades and threw everything he had. Will thought he would have to increase his physical reinforcement a bit. He blocked the strike. Ulpis shouted that it was impressive. I'll heal myself properly afterwards. Will looked at him. Forgive me. He moved the bagger. A wall of sand rose up between them. Both of them stepped back, caught off guard. The master had intervened. The sand was his. He said there were still other matches to get through and told both of them to withdraw. Will looked coldly at Ulpis on the ground and asked him if he could join the regular classes next time. Ulpis clenched his teeth and told him to do whatever he wanted. Will thanked him. As he walked away, he thought about what he had just felt. That was his way of offensive magic, and it had worked better than he expected, since he had defeated a talented battle mage of his own age, all thanks to Professor Veronica. There was a path for a healer to become a battle mage. He could become a battle mage. He looked towards the academy's flag. Volpos whispered to the teacher that what had happened was an accident during class and it could turn into a problem. He said that he really didn't want to have to report every detail to his father and that the teacher should understand what that meant. The teacher agreed. They couldn't have a healer going around acting arrogantly. In the classroom, Will thought that he could finally attend classes. They were going to learn everything there was to know about offensive magic. The teacher entered, glanced briefly at Will and then turned to look at the class. She announced that the lesson would be about the creation of magical tools. They were going to assemble ice bonds. He would hand out the materials and they should follow the instructions while infusing mana. He'll recognize the format. At the Healer Academy, there was a similar class, but there they only made potions and recovery items. It made sense that here they were making weapons. They probably expected everyone to infuse dynamic mana, but for the creation of magical tools, the nature of the mana did not matter so much. Most of it depended on the materials. He should be able to handle this class without any problem. He began to add the powdered branch of the flame tree to the ice golem fragment. Then, the mana stone started to shine differently. Will wasted it with physical reinforcement. The explosion shook the bottom of the room. Will was lying on the floor surrounded by ice spikes, staring at the ceiling like a fool. The professor called him out on the spot. He wanted to know what Will thought he was doing. What exactly was he doing? Will explained that the stone had activated even before he infused it with mana. But the professor wasn't interested in excuses, he was deducting marks from his grade. Laughter came from the back of the room. Ulpis laughed along with everyone else, looking at Will with that strange expression. Will met his gaze. In the next class on magical creatures, a salamander was right in front of him. The professor warned that students with low marks should sit in the front row and pay close attention. Will had barely finished processing how close he was to that thing when the salamander spat fire at him. He blocked it with a pot. The professor asked why he was holding a cauldron. Will said it was necessary. The cauldron was confiscated, so that's how they want to play it, thought Will. They allow him to attend classes but have no intention of letting him learn anything. A girl was watching him from afar with a slightly uneasy expression. The harassment did not end there. The professor kept calling on Will to answer questions about material he had never seen before. Outside the classroom, someone told the instructor that Will had misbehaved and that he had gone without dinner because of it. Back in the dormitory, Will lay down staring at the ceiling. The wind was blowing against him in this school and it was relentless. There was still a mountain of problems ahead, but he was making progress and he couldn't let this small bit of harassment get in his way. On top of that, he had fought with his own hands for the first time and won. He really could become a battle mage. He had also managed to get a textbook. He needed to go over the day's materials. The next day, Will reached the classroom and there was no one there. It was class time, but the teacher hadn't shown up. The only other person there was that girl from before. It seemed like the class had been shifted to another room and no one had bothered to tell him. Will went over and apologized. He asked her if she thought the classroom had been moved. She said she had been thinking the same thing. Then she added, since she was the only one there with Will, the student whom the teacher and everyone else hated. She supposed that was exactly it. I think we're on the same side, she said. Hated loners go well together. Will found the line a bit harsh, but her tone was somber enough to seem genuine. Either way, he was happy to make a friend. He said it was a pleasure to meet her. She said the pleasure was hers. Her name was Erica Glenn. Will told her that she was his first friend at the academy. Erica replied that in that case it was hard to avoid. After all, he hardly attended classes and on top of that he was a healer. Everyone said that healers were weak. She herself attended all the classes and was a battle mage, but she didn't have any friends either. Will thought about that. Leaving aside his personality, the discrimination against healers was deep-rooted. In his previous life, he had been recognized too quickly to face that sort of thing. But in an academy specializing in offensive magic, the prejudice was strong, and studying there meant having to fight against it as well. Erica sighed and asked him why he had come to Schwartz. Will said that being born a healer was not a reason to stay away from the fight. Erica seemed surprised. He said that he had his own reasons and asked her why she had come. Erika explained that she came from a small noble family in the countryside. No children had been born, and her parents were worried about the family line dying out. They thought that if she could become a man as a mage, she could take on the role of head of the family. Will said that he understood. Graduating from Schwartz would certainly make it possible. Erika admitted that she hardly had any talent for offensive magic. That's why they couldn't make friends, the classes were painful, and it was the worst. But now she had made a friend. As long as she had Will, who was an even bigger failure than herself, she wouldn't feel so insecure about her bad grades. Will said that things might not turn out the way she thought. Erika asked what he meant. Will replied that first they needed to find the classroom where the classes were actually being held. Erika decided to follow in. In the classroom, Will announced that they had arrived. The teacher responded coldly that they were late. The class had started a long time ago. Will apologized and explained that they didn't know about the change of room. The teacher was not interested in excuses, and since Will was there, told him to solve the problem on the blackboard. Erika was outraged. They had just arrived. How were they supposed to know? And Will had hardly had any classes yet. Will looked at the board. The teacher warned that if he got it right, the matter would be dropped, but if he got it wrong, he would lose marks. Wilpis remarked that at this rate, Will would fail in no time. Even so, Will picked up the chalk. He began to write. The class watched in silence. Some were already expecting him to fail. But Will finished. He turned to the teacher, who had the complete magic circle on the blackboard, and asked what he thought. The teacher was surprised. It was correct. He told Will to sit down, and Ulpis let out a gasp of surprise. Erika couldn't understand how he had done that. Will returned to his seat with a calm smile and continued with the lesson. After class, Erika ran after him, wanting to know how he had solved the problem. Will explained that it seemed complicated, but it was just an application of the examples from the book he had studied beforehand. Erika asked him if he had read that book on his own. Will confirmed that he had read it the previous day. Schwartz's textbook was flawless. It covered everything from the basics to advanced applications without any nonsense. Exactly what you would expect from the best academy of magic. Just reading it was enough. Besides that, he had always been good at theory, and the reasoning he carried from his previous life helped a lot when it came to understanding offensive magic. He ended up staying awake till late, but it was fun. Erika's jaw dropped. The material was too dense to absorb without a teacher, and she had thought Will was the weakest student in the class. If he was at that level, where did that leave her? She asked him not to leave her behind. Will placed a hand on her shoulder and said it was alright. He would teach her everything she didn't understand. After all, they were friends. Erika thanked him. Will thought to himself that he hadn't come to Schwartz to make friends, but having Erika around opened up new possibilities for him. Then he told her that he needed a favor in return. The classes weren't just theory, the next one was general offensive magic, which was exactly the reason why he had failed and been kicked out of all the classes before. He could manage now. He had even defeated Ulpis, but general offensive magic was still beyond his reach. He had a plan and needed her help. He explained the difference. General offensive magic used formulas that had already been analyzed and structured, accessible to anyone who learned them. Unique magic, on the other hand, was created within the user and only worked for that specific person. Schwartz had separate classes for each one. For unique magic, there wasn't a single correct answer, and there he could manage by using his offensive healing magic. But for general offensive magic, without casting the spell, there was no passing grade. The teacher confirmed it clearly. Will might have done well in the written part, but the practical part was a different story. If he didn't cast offensive magic, he would fail. The task was simple: hit the target with a fireball, the most basic spell of all. Without that, he could forget about moving forward or graduating. The teacher suspected that Will had used healing magic during the mock battle, and the story about his movements improving after healing even made some sense. But general offensive magic was something completely different. Someone as incompetent as him should just drop the class. Then the teacher noticed something. Will was smiling and there was fire in the palm of his hand. Will felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. The teacher hadn't realized it. The previous day, when he was with Erika, Will had asked her to create a fireball using general offensive magic. He stored the spell inside the tail of a salamander and hid it in his own hand while healing it so that it wouldn't get burnt. Erica wanted to know if that was possible for a healer and who on earth Will was. A moment before releasing the spell, Will used healing magic to activate the stored flame charge inside the salamander's tail. To anyone watching from outside, it looked as if they had conjured a fireball right there in the palm of their hand. The projectile flew straight and burnt the training dummy. Will turned to the teacher with a calm smile and asked what he thought. The teacher stared for a moment. That was definitely the flame of a standard spell. It was possible that the boy had really learnt it. Will passed. He could go back to the tube. Erica's jaw dropped. Ulpis clenched his cheek. Later, in the classroom, Ulpis got straight to the point. What is going on here? The teacher said that he would also like to know. Ulpis was not interested in explanations. A healer had dared to challenge him and he was not going to tolerate sharing a class with that sort of person. If necessary, he would tell his father and the whole class would be over. The teacher tried to reason that it was too much. Ulpis interrupted him. Use any means necessary but get that fellow out of his sight. Ulpis left. The teacher was left alone in the room thinking trying something outside of class was risky. If he got caught, it wouldn't be the same as a pampered rich kid doing whatever he could. But sometimes one had to take risks to protect one's own position. Just a simple healer acting as if he owned the place and who still didn't even know what the other teachers were up to. He wasn't gonna let that boy ruin his life. He would have to deal with him personally. After school, at the training ground, the teacher got down to business. He supposed Will was feeling quite pleased with himself, and that was not a compliment. He had missed several classes since the registration began. How did he plan to make up for that? Will thought about telling him straight to his face that the absences were the teacher's fault, but decided it wasn't worth it. He explained that he had asked a classmate for the material he was missing and studied on his own to cover everything. There was no problem at all. The teacher didn't budge. In cases of absence, supplementary classes were compulsory, and the content was decided by the instructor in charge. It would be a mock battle against him personally. Will took a moment to process that. A teacher fighting with a student. The teacher said he would give him an advantage. Considering the difference in skill, landing just one hit would be enough to pass. Since he was being so generous, there was no reason to argue. What the teacher didn't say out loud was what he was thinking. With that magic, the boy's attacks would never even get close. All he had to do was beat him until he understood the difference in strength. Then he would listen to what he had to say. Will agreed. He would do it. The teacher smiled and activated his magic. Will had seen that magic once before. It was the one that raised the ground. He dodged it quickly, but then a blow came from above as well. He ducked, and the next one came up again from below. The teacher asked with disdain if running away was the only thing he knew how to do. Will straightened up, analyzing the situation. Unlike creation magic, this style manipulated the existing terrain. That's why it was so fast, and the range of attack angles was huge, but it wasn't unavoidable. He jumped, dodged the blows, and kept moving forward. The teacher activated another magic circle on the ground, raising walls on either side of Will to trap him between them. Will used the walls as leverage and jumped over them, approaching with his weapon in hand. But when he was close enough to land a blow, the teacher turned into stone. Will moved away from the spikes. The teacher said that the boy was weak. He couldn't even break through his absolute form with that level of power. He had never heard of a healer using healing magic to attack, but it was just a cheap imitation. Wanting to be a battle mage with such pathetic magic was almost laughable. Will replied calmly. Through healing magic, he studied the human body in depth and learned that humans generally live while unconsciously suppressing their own strength. The reason was simple. The body cannot withstand its full power. If someone tried to exert strength beyond that limit, their own body would break. The teacher responded with disdain. Will was only trying to lecture him because he couldn't win against offensive magic. Will calmly replied that in any case, even if you remove the limiter to release more strength, the body would end up damaged. But he was a healer, so it didn't matter even if he broke his arm. The teacher was caught off guard. Will approached with a crooked smile, saying that he hated pain, but he could heal himself on the spot. So let them try it right now. He moved with all his strength. The blow landed cleanly and the teacher's glasses went flying through the air. Will said that it wasn't a good idea to arbitrarily decide a student's limits. He had learned that when Professor Veronica suggested using healing magic offensively and that there was nothing more foolish than declaring something impossible, he could become much stronger. But before he could finish the sentence, Will turned sharply and dodged a blow from the teacher. They stood face to face. The teacher was holding his glasses, visibly furious. Will said he thought the teacher would pass him if he managed to land just one hit. The teacher told him to keep quiet. There were no witnesses around. Admitting that he had been punched by a healer was something he simply could not accept, so he launched a barrage of stones. Will remarked that releasing the limiter was not just for landing a punch. He dug his foot into the ground and shot towards the teacher at an absurd speed. The teacher barely had time to process it. The stone wall was not rising quickly enough. He squeezed his eyes shut tightly and then looked to the side, trying to figure out if the movement had stopped, but he couldn't move. The blows kept coming and time seemed to have slowed down around him. He mentally begged Will to stop. The pain was unbearable, much worse than being hit at normal speed. He couldn't escape, he couldn't even scream. He simply pleaded in silence for it to end. Then he was thrown backwards. His body hit the ground hard. Will came closer and said that for him, it had only been a moment. The teacher, still on the ground, demanded that Will explain what he had done. Will replied that unlike the teacher, he could explain it very well. At the exact moment the blow landed, he activated a sensory enhancement on himself, originally a healing spell for people with impaired vision and hearing. By taking his reaction speed to an extreme level, his senses became absurdly sharp, making a single second feel like dozens of separate moments. He wanted to know how much it hurt to take a blow in that state. Then he asked if he had passed the lesson. The teacher said yes. Will added one more thing. He knew it would be difficult to get rid of deeply rooted prejudices, but if the teacher continued down that path, he would make sure the man knew exactly what kind of pain his own body was capable of feeling. All he wanted was to attend classes without being bothered by other students. Could the teacher guarantee that? Later, in the corridors of Schwartz Academy, the teacher was walking alone, still trying to process what had happened. He had always believed that healers were weak, without any combat ability, and destined to obey offensive mages. But Will was different. Not only did he have the skill to fight, but he also had a real killing intent. Ulpis appeared and asked if the lesson was over, commenting that Will was one step closer to being expelled. The teacher told him to keep quiet and to stop picking on Will. Thinking of him as just a simple healer was a mistake Ulpis could not afford to make. Ulpis said that was not what he wanted to hear and reminded him that if he told everything to his father, the teacher knew what would happen. The teacher told him to go ahead and do it. He paused, thought for a second and then added, if Ulpis went to his father about this, there was a good chance that he would be the one expelled, not Will. Instead of the Omen family making their move as expected, it seemed that Will would be the one to extend his claws in the future. Ulpis was left alone in the corridor. He struck his fist against the wall in frustration, cursing the situation that was closing in around him. A few days later, in class, Will yawned. Things were quite peaceful. Apparently, the teacher had spoken to Ulpis because sometimes he looked at Will with resentment, but he never did anything. That allowed Will to focus on his studies. Although it was not enough, to change the future of humanity, he needed to become much stronger. The idea of using healing magic to improve physically was solid, but what he was doing was basically punching and kicking with brute force. Sensory enhancement worked for intimidation, but compared to the versatility of a battle mage, he still had a long way to go. He needed to think of new approaches. He called Veronica. She said that before anything else she wanted to tell him something. Will asked what it was. The professor said that he had done well. He had become a big topic among the teachers. For a healer, keeping up with the classes at Schwartz was quite an achievement, although most of them seemed rather unhappy about it. Will thought he could have guessed as much. He asked her if she was hiding the fact that it was she who had advised him. Veronica said that she was not hiding it. She simply hadn't had the chance to say anything to the other teachers. Will realized that she too was a bit of an outsider among her colleagues. Even so, he said it was a relief. It had all been thanks to her advice, and he would have felt terrible if his actions had put her in a bad spot. Veronica replied that it didn't matter to her, so he mean worry. And besides, she was grateful. As she had said before, because of the nature of healing spirits, none of them would ever think of putting that theory into practice. Then she drew her sword. She said she was curious to see what a combat healer was really like. Will asked her what she was doing. Veronica replied that she wanted to assess his current condition since he wanted advice on how to become stronger. Will said that fighting with her was too much. She replied that there are no breaks on the battlefield and lunged at him. Will was caught off guard and stepped back but managed to block the blow with a dagger. Veronica's strength began to overpower him. She kept pressing on blow after blow. Even with his reaction speed enhanced by magic, Will could barely keep up with her. Up close, it was clear that it wasn't just speed. Her movements were refined, calculated to unleash a relentless barrage. Forcing his body to keep up only through physical enhancement had its limits. He had one chance, the speed he hadn't shown her yet. He needed to catch Veronica off guard. He focused his strength in his foot and launched a thrust. Veronica was surprised, but she moved her sword with precision, deflected the blow, ducked and cut the blade of his weapon. Will looked at her in surprise as the sword fell to the ground. He let out a slow sigh. Veronica sheathed her sword and said she was impressed. She hadn't expected him to force her to use a magic sword. Will said he had barely broken a sweat. She replied that she had assumed he would just be a healer who fought like a battle mage. But he had skills that put him in a different league. Someone genuinely talented. Will thanked her. The professor added that he liked the ambition and that he was right. Pure physical effort was not enough. Will said that no matter how much he pushed his body's limits, there was a limit to what he could do. Veronica replied that a sword isn't just for striking, it can also be used to push or to throw aside. There had to be other ways to make use of what he had. Will said that nothing had worked so far. She continued, he probably lacked real combat experience. He needed the feeling of a real battle to shape his ideas. She asked him if he hadn't noticed anything during the fight just now. Will asked her if he should continue training with her. Veronica said it wasn't a bad idea, but as it happened, there would soon be a training exercise. Will thought about it. Something similar had also existed in his previous life. The joint training exercise between the three schools, the Schwartz Offensive Magic Academy, the Heilig Healing Magic Academy, and the Silbern Sword Academy. The students from each school would form groups and take on real subjugation missions. He hadn't participated when he was at Heilig, but in this life, he would defeat the monsters and change the future he knew. It would be his first real hunt. Veronica stared at him intently without reacting for a moment. Then she explained to him that to participate, he needed to prove his abilities in the Academy's selection exam. He had heard about a student who was called a prodigy among the first-year students that year. Will needed to aim for the top spot before all that. Will asked how the exam worked. Veronica explained that the candidates fought among themselves. Around 100 people enrolled every year, and those who demonstrated strength were selected. Will took in the information. It all came down to combat. He supposed there would be few candidates willing to participate on their own, but that proactive attitude must have been part of Schwartz's style. The thought brought memories to the surface. He wondered what his mentor would be doing now. Veronica added that, in any case, the so-called prodigy had already surpassed some of the teachers. Reaching the top position would not be easy. Will thought that the boy must be better than that teacher, yeah. Then he asked her if she had not met the student in person. Veronica said that apparently there was a teacher involved, so no one came to ask questions. Will felt that was not the only reason. She told him not to worry, she would also help with the training. Will thanked her. On the day of the selection exam, Will walked thinking that the day had come in the blink of an eye. He had prepared as much as he could. Now was the moment. A voice called out his name. Will recognized it quickly. Principal Anilam Gordram. Anilam said that it had been a while and that his granddaughter had been doing well since then. Although Will had saved the girl, the principal regretted not being able to see him after that and knew that adjusting to Schwartz must have been difficult. Will replied that at first he had some trouble, but now he was completely fine. He added that he was aiming for the top spot in the exam. The principal laughed, saying that was impressive. A voice cut through the air behind them. It was a teacher, and the tone was anything but friendly. He remarked that it was a joke for this fellow to want the first place. As the training supervisor, he said he would love to teach punks like him a lesson. Will recognized him immediately. In his previous life, he had come across this man, the Purple Lightning Goat, an offensive magic user whose heroic feats in the Great War were well known. Personally, Will did not have fond memories of him. Goat continued, combat was all about talent, and training or effort could not replace it. Being a healer meant that Will had no chance of winning. Will looked at him poorly. Anilam intervened, saying that the exam would begin shortly and that the results would speak for themselves. There was no point in arguing there. Goat agreed offhandedly and added that in any case it was Sirius who would be facing Will. A young man with long white hair approached. Sirius Blue Knot nodded to the headmaster. Will thought, so this was the prodigy, the opponent he needed to defeat to reach first place. The two looked at each other and something lit up in their eyes. Anilam commented that hot blood was good, but it was already time. They should going. Everyone walked towards the arena. The other students buzzed in the stands while the participants lined up and stood up. Will noticed Erika among them and asked him if she was participating. She replied that if she didn't, they would cut her attendance to some classes. Ulpis looked at Will with a gaze full of anger. Will smiled at Erika, who made it clear she would rather be anywhere else. Anilam took the floor and said he was proud to see so many participants once again that year. He asked them to let passion and fighting spirit guide their hearts. He explained that the preliminary round was a survival match. Whoever lasted till the end would move on to the main event. Will did the numbers in his head. 100 people on a battlefield, that's a lot of people. Anilam anticipated the reaction and told them not to worry about the numbers. Then he raised his staff. A huge portal opened up beneath everyone's feet. The ground turned into a starry sky. The students looked around, unable to understand what was happening. Anilam announced that they were leaving. Will appeared in the middle of a forest. He recognized the place. It must have been the one behind the academy. A voice sounded nearby and asked him if he could hear. The teleportation had scattered everyone on their own. They should avoid strong enemies and cooperate with anyone they knew. The initial positions depended on luck. Will muttered that a spell capable of teleporting 100 people at once was simply absurd. The headmaster ignored the comment and declared that the selection exam had begun. Will immediately jumped and landed on top of a branch. He compressed his presence to the minimum, suppressing his vital signs so that he would not be detected. But when he looked back, there were already 3 students fighting nearby. One of them ordered his golem to advance. A girl ran towards the other 2 with a magic hammer in her hand. A third, a blonde, unleashed a snowstorm and froze both of them in place. Will watched everything carefully. It was a good opportunity to study a variety of offensive spells. It would be a waste to just stay on the defensive, only trying to pass the test. And besides, he wanted to try out a few things himself. The golem boy defeated the other 2. He celebrated loudly, saying that everyone must have seen how strong his golem was. Will appeared behind him before he could finish his sentence. He grabbed his head firmly and activated the consciousness-altering spell. The boy fainted on the spot. Will looked at him for a second. The technique manipulated the flow of life to force the opponent to faint. It required direct contact with the head, so it was difficult to use unless there was a clear difference in power. But he neutralized him without causing any harm. Professor Veronica would be delighted. He turned around and dodged a series of knives that sliced through the air towards him, embedding themselves in the ground all around. He sighed. Ulpis never learns. The noble said he didn't know what he was talking about, that he just wanted to pass the exam and was going to use everything he had to achieve it. The 2 companions behind Ulpis moved together. Ulpis conjured knives with his magical formulas. The second one coated the swords with poison. The third one replicated everything with shadows, multiplying the poison knife several times over. Ulpis warned that the knives would pierce the skin at the slightest contact. In that quantity, it didn't matter how fast Will was. He wouldn't be able to dodge down. The swords were thrown. Will calculated quickly. He could neutralize the poison with healing magic, but getting scratched all over by all that, even with physical enhancement, was going to be a problem. He activated the healing spell in his hand, then something threw itself in front of him. The golem blocked everything, absorbing the knives like a shield. Alpes didn't understand. The golem belonged to the boy whom Will had knocked down. Will figured out what had happened. Healing magic normally only works on living beings, but the golem operated through a mechanism powered by the summoner's blood. He couldn't control it precisely, but by injecting life force he could direct it enough. The golem moved towards the growth. It gave one of the subordinates a clean punch and sat on top of the other. Alpes complained that his men had been defeated so easily. Will was already standing in front of him. He grabbed his face with one hand. "Good night." Alpes fainted. Elsewhere in the forest, the golem was facing a water spell. Will watched from a distance, satisfied. Physical enhancement limited him to close combat, but the golem covered exactly that weakness. And there was still time to study the other students' spells. Then a hurricane formed in a corner of the forest. Will frowned. What was that now? The gust came towards them. Will jumped to dodge it and the cyclone passed by. The golem and the nearby students were all knocked down at once. When Will landed, he looked to one side. Someone was approaching. He was serious, exactly as Will had expected. Impressive skill. Someone who wouldn't be easy to defeat. Will was still weighing up whether it was worth trying that when the principal's voice cut through the air. Enough effort. The preliminaries were over and all four had passed. The main event would be held the next day in the arena. For now, they could take care of themselves. The teleportation spell would activate in a few moments. Will watched his rival from a distance. Sirius did the same, holding his gaze and not looking away until he disappeared along with the others. Will too couldn't wait for the next day. Back in his dormitory, he opened his diary and jotted down a few things. What could he do before the main event? What did he need to think about? The night was peaceful. Outside in the corridor, not so much. Some nobles were complaining among themselves. That fellow was too strong and had even healed everyone who had been knocked out. Wasn't that enough for them to give up? Ulpus told the two of them to keep quiet. They came from weak families, that's why they didn't understand. The teachings of the Omen family were clear. Healers had no place among true magicians. If someone found out that a healer was holding him back, what would his father say? The other two exchanged a glance. They said he could do whatever he wanted, but they won't get hurt for it anymore, and they walked away down the corridor without looking back. Ulpis was left there boiling with anger. He didn't need magic to get rid of Will. In his room, Will was studying as usual when someone knocked on the door. Too late for a normal visit. He felt that something was wrong even before opening it. It was Ulpis. He wished him good night with a smile and asked if Will didn't think the moon looked beautiful that night. Will got straight to the point. What was he planning? The noble replied that he only wanted a peaceful conversation. He said with an almost relaxed honesty that he hated healers and had already done a lot to get Will expelled from the academy. Will thought he would neutralize most of it. Ulpis said he was tired of going around in circles. The message was simple. Will should leave Schwartz. Will said that at least he respected the honesty, but he wanted to understand why so much effort was being put into making him the villain. Ulpis replied that he didn't need a reason to mistreat healers. It was no different in the Omen family. Anyone born a healer was sent to the remote branch. Alpis's elder brother was one of them. Even when people made fun of him, the boy would just laugh it off. An offensive mage and a pathetic healer were two completely different things, yeah? Will said those were deeply ingrained teachings for such a prestigious family. Ulpis nodded without any irony. And that was exactly the reason why Will should leave Schwartz. That was no place for healers. Will asked if Ulpis really thought he was gonna say yes. Ulpis said he would make him sit it. There was a family Will would want to protect, right? The servants outside had already done their research. Will had grown up with his sister in a remote village. He must miss her quite a lot. If Ulpis gave the right instructions, what would happen to her? He left the question hanging in the air. Then he came closer and asked if he had managed to convince Will now. Will said yes. Ulpis told him to go and pack his things immediately. It was then that he felt someone grab him by the neck. Will threw him back and twisted his arm into a position from which there was no escape. Ulpis begged him to stop. His arm was about to break. Will said he had already made his decision. Then came the prat. Ulpis started breathing in short gasps and his voice came out in fragments. If he showed up with a broken arm like this, the academy wouldn't keep quiet, nor would Will's father. Will said it was alright and healed the arm. Ulpis realized what had happened and looked up, confused and relieved for a moment until the next crack. Will had broken it again. He said he would heal it and break it again as many times as necessary until Ulpis asked him to stop. Ulpis asked. Will let go of his arm and spoke calmly. Going after him was something he could handle, but if Ulfi started chasing after his sister and his sister, he would never let it go. So it was better for the nobleman to sincerely beg from the bottom of his heart, while Will was still only breaking his spirit. Ulpis remained on the ground, trying to make sense of what had just happened. A demon with the face of a healer should never have gotten involved with that sort of person, because what awaits them is something worse than death. And so the night passes. The protagonist tells Ulpis not to forget the promise, never to lay a hand on him again. Will lies down in his room and thinks that, honestly, that was a bit refreshing, but now he will sleep until the next day arrives. A few hours later, the main event finally begins. Alnirim takes everything calmly from his seat. Bode and Veronica settle down layby. Will observes the situation and thinks that the four who passed the preliminaries will face each other in one-on-one battles. Even so, he still can't believe that she actually survived. He turns around and finds Erika standing right in front of him. The girl explains that she built walls of fire and used that strategy without having to defeat anyone directly. Will thinks back on it. The offensive mages ran away from the start, but she couldn't have survived just by doing that. Erika smiles and says that since they're friends, he could be nice to her. Will says no. She replies that she made it through the preliminaries on her own and now aims to get a high evaluation. A professor announces the start of the battle. Erika prepares a fire spell and casts it directly at Will. He blocks with his own arms, thinking it was ordinary fire, the kind of flame he can easily generate from. He even feels a bit sorry for Erika because he'll have to hit her. But then he realizes that something is wrong. There was something different about the fire. Erika throws another fireball and warns him that she hasn't finished yet. Will moves aside and realizes that the flames which hit him earlier still haven't gone out. That was Erika's unique magic. Fire with abnormal persistence. The raw power is average, but if he keeps getting hit repeatedly, it will be dangerous even with healing. When he saw the walls of flames earlier, he thought it was just a property of the salamander tail, but it was actually Erika's influence. Now he understands how she created barriers that were so difficult to break, and in a way that perfectly reflects her stubborn personality. The crowd goes wild. Everyone is shouting that she's really good and that she's going to finish off the healer. For a moment, Erika wonders if she can really defeat Will, but she quickly pushes that thought aside. She also made it through the preliminaries. She tells him that it's time to give up. Will says that's fine and that he was just about to counteract. He heals his own hand while speaking. Erika activates another spell, declaring that it's time to make sure. Will cracks a smile. If the flames don't disappear, he'll use them to attack. Erika watches as the flames wrap around his fists. Will moves closer to her. The girl stretches out her hands and says she gives up. She falls to her knees. The winner is announced. Will thinks that even after winning, healers still don't get any respect. The crowd shouts at Erika not to give up like that if she still considers herself an offensive mage. Erika looks at the crowd and says they were cheering her on just a moment ago. She feels bad about it. Will helps her up and tells her not to worry. He thinks she fought well. She has a good chance of passing. Her eyes light up, but Bode appears behind her and interrupts the moment. Now that I think about it, he says healers are worthless rubbish. Giving yourself up to rubbish makes you even worse than rubbish. She clearly failed, she should leave. Will asks if that way of speaking isn't a bit inappropriate for students. Bode replies that he is the supervisor of the battlefield and that if the participants show a low level, he is already walking away as he speaks, leaving the thought unfinished. He says over his shoulder that it looks like only one person is going to advance. Sirius appears behind Will and speaks to him. Will wonders when he got there and thinks that this guy also knows how to talk. He wants to know if Sirius thinks the same as Professor Bode. Sirius replies that in the end strength is everything and that the Professor Bode was right because he's strong. Will says that he understands, but Sirius adds that he doesn't think Will is weak either, so he'd better be right about that. Will looks at him with a serious-like gaze, a serious blue note. In his past life, Will had heard about an offensive wizard, absurdly powerful, of his own age, who operated on the northern border. The wind he created destroyed everything in its path, reducing it all to nothing. And in the final match between the two of them, Will was the one who won. Will says that judging by Professor Bode's attitude, it seems he won't be recognized unless he wins. So he is going to win. Sirius says that he understands. The professor announces the start of the exam. Sirius gathers all his energy and launches it towards Will. Will dodges by throwing himself to one side, gets up from the ground with force and charges at his opponent. Sirius remains completely still and sends him flying with a gust of wind. Will extends his hand in front to protect himself, thinking he understands the pattern, but he can't get close enough. The two of them face off. Sirius comments that Will is fast, which is a problem. He prepares another spell and launches another gust of wind. Will realizes that unlike the tornado, this blast sends everything flying. If he takes a direct hit, he'll be thrown out of the arena. It's time to use that. He touches the ground. A tree bursts out from the ground and grows within seconds into a massive structure right in front of him. Erika's eyes go wide as saucers. Was that also healing magic? Will had become even stronger. Will keeps a smile on his face and asks what Veronica thinks. Veronica looks at the tree and starts to speak, but Will interrupts her. He explains that he channeled life force into the plants and made them grow rapidly. He learnt about offensive plant magic at the library and thought he could put it to use. With that, he has several tactics depending on the type of plant. Then, he starts to lose consciousness and falls into Veronica's arms. She asks him if he's alright. Will confirms it, wondering if he had drained his mana. The book didn't mention that it was such a taxing technique. Veronica says exactly what he was thinking. Destroying is easier than healing. Healing magic consumes much more magical power, and recreating something with it is probably more inefficient than using normal offensive magic. Will realizes that he needs to choose carefully when to use it. He never had the talent for offensive magic to make up for the cost, but he managed to surpass his own limit. On the other side, Sirius raises his hand and sends out gusts of wind that split the tree in two. Will analyzes the pattern as he watches. A tornado that throws enemies away. An explosion that blasts the sides. Wind blades for large structures. Anyone who comes close will be struck by the tornado. Powerful spells with no openings. Ekdam, what you would expect from an outstanding candidate. But Will has already decided that he too will become stronger. He jumps towards Sirius. Sirius says that no matter how many times he tries, he will never catch up to him. Will goes flying at him. Even so, a smile appears on his face. Sirius doesn't understand, and then a tree hits him on the shoulder. Sirius doesn't understand what just happened. He'll explain. The tornado protects the surrounding space but not the underground. The plant sends roots through the ground and they grow anywhere. Sirius looks ahead holding his injured shoulder. Will asks if he really cares that much about Professor Bode. The two always seem completely incompatible. Sirius replies that Bode is strong and teaches him. Will responds by saying that he wouldn't need that. He comes from a prestigious family. But Sirius explains that in his family, magical ability is everything. Age and gender do not matter. The strongest becomes the leader and everyone else is a rival in the fight for succession. His father never taught him magic. Will understands and Sirius adds that's why he follows the professor. It's the most direct way to become stronger. Then he asks if they're done already because his shoulder is killing him. Everyone is caught off guard by how casually he said it. Will looks up with a smile. Behind Sirius, a wind dragon begins to take shape. Sirius says he'll handle this and sends the dragon towards the protagonist. Will realizes the seriousness of the attack. Lately he's been thinking about this. Offensive mages tend to hold back during practice matches. That's exactly why he tries his best to fight for real. Having talent, a good family, or a tough past doesn't make anyone better. Everyone has something, and that's exactly why he wants to truly defeat Sirius right now. Sirius asks what this is about. Will says he was just thinking out loud, but now he's gonna use his best seed. Vines shoot out in front of him. The leaves open up at the very same moment. Will summons Yggdrasil, the world tree, with everything he's got. Normally it would take a long time to grow like that, and forcing such growth uses up much more magical power than any other plant. But the more power he puts in, the more power it carries. The tree charges towards the tree. The dragon splits the tree in two and keeps moving forward. Sirius sighs. He watches the pieces of the tree fly through the air and then they start shining in the sunlight. Sirius doesn't understand. How is it still in one piece? He'll exclaim, "This plant has an absurd amount of vitality. Even a single branch can keep growing without stopping." While Sirius was creating the dragon, his defense was completely open, and the world tree did not waste that opening. Yggdrasil struck Sirius Bereke. Sirius falls to the ground injured. Will points a sword at him. Sirius says he lost. The announcement sounds, "The winner is Will." The crowd is buzzing with excitement. The healer defeats Sirius in a direct duel. Maybe he really is strong. Sirius looks down at the ground and sighs. Will extends a hand saying it was close. Exactly what you'd expect from a prodigy. Sirius replies that it still wasn't good enough. Will doesn't understand. It was a great fight. Before he can say anything else, Bode appears and strikes Sirius with a bolt of lightning. The boy falls even harder. Bode kicks the tree off him. Then he picks him up in his arms and tells him that he failed and that he'll train him again. The crowd murmurs that he's being too harsh on him. Bode turns to everyone and says the same goes for any idiot who's watching. He can't accept that a healer ended up in first place. A deathly silence follows. Will wonders if this is going too far. He is the one who won, but that doesn't mean Sirius is weak. It was a good fight, and if they fight again, Bode cuts him off. He says Will shouldn't even bother replying to him, talking about a good fight or about future potential. That's just nonsense. On the battlefield, skill is everything. Whoever loses is treated like rubbish and loses their life. It's as simple as that. Will thinks that Bode is doing this to his own student and then speaks up. He defeated Sirius and proved his skill. Being a healer doesn't mean being weak. Bode replies that this weapon was in the past, Bode and his companions pinned Will against the wall. Will said that healers don't fight, but they can help everyone with their healing magic. It was a division of roles, and without teamwork, humanity would perish. Bode remained silent for a moment and then spoke. His students stood on the front line to buy time while the others escaped. But those cowards were taken down by small monsters while they were running away. The students who stayed behind and fought with nothing to gain lost their lives, and the healers couldn't even reach the battlefield, let alone save them. For rubbish like them, that was exactly the reason why Sirius had died. Bode withdrew his fist and his eyes filled with tears. Will admitted that Bode was right. Being weak means you can't do anything when it's needed. But in an era where monsters will keep getting more dangerous, the strong cannot afford to be selfish. Will clenched his fist and said, "People like him who have nothing need to become strong." Then he asked directly, if he defeated Professor Bode, would he be recognized? Bode gave a smile. He said that once a match is declared, all the weak should step aside. The narrator noticed that Bode could not admit out loud that he wanted a real fight, but the young man made it clear that when the time for selection came, the rules would be his. The host looked at Win. Will simply nodded. The narrator sighed and announced the special match. Professor Bode versus Will. Bode cracked his knuckles and warned that he was going to prove his opponent's level was really low. Will knew that his magic was almost at its limit and that he was facing the strongest opponent so far. There was no way to win in the usual manner. First, he needed to heal himself, but Bode was already approaching, saying he was too slow. A violet lightning lit up Will's face and struck him with full force. Bode looked ahead and laid out the 3 reasons why his victory was absolute: distance to suppress the enemy, speed to prevent any reaction, and power to finish him off in a single blow. The opponent can't do anything and the battle is over. Then he remarked, almost bored, that Will couldn't even hear him anymore. Will asked where the final blow had landed. He was still standing. Will knew about Bode's unique lightning magic. To minimize the damage, he needed to redirect the current away from the core of his body. No matter how powerful the blow is, if the brain gets burnt, no healing magic can fix it. So he created a blood circuit that could conduct electricity quickly. By letting it pass through his arm and dispersing it through his leg, he reduced the impact. He could handle it. It was time to counter-attack. Bode mocked him arrogantly. He said that Will had managed to hold on but just barely and in terrible condition. Will activated his physical enhancement, but his mana ran out the very next moment and he felt his body lock up. He couldn't channel any strength at all. Bode explained that there was an absolute rule. Anyone struck by the violet lightning gets paralyzed and can't move. Will moved anyway, warning that this was gonna be a problem. Bode kept smiling. He said that, come to think of it, Will had done quite well just a moment ago. Another bolt of lightning struck in. In the stands, Erika clasped her hands and cried while Will cursed the situation. Bode was truly strong. His unique magic had no openings and all that arrogance now made sense. Even so, Will got back up again. He was determined to win. He announced that this was his last seed and his last spell. He activated plant manipulation and shouted for the tree to grow. The aquatic treasure tree sprouted in front of him. As planned, it absorbed large amounts of water from the ground. Used as a shield, it would disperse the electricity. Bode demanded to know what that was. Will looked up, just as surprised as the other students. Bode simply split the tree in two. Will admitted that he had no way out. Bode approached with a mocking smile, asking if that was his last move. Finishing with a defensive technique was pathetic. But then he noticed something beside the tree. Mushrooms were starting to sprout all over the split wood. What is this? Bode muttered. Will could hardly believe it had worked so well. Some plants and fungi grow faster after a lightning strike. When a forest is reduced to ashes, they are the first to appear without any competition. That fungus was one of them, but that wasn't its only trait. Bode looked at the mushrooms with a strange expression. A second later, his expression changed. My body feels weak. That was the opportunity Will needed. He focused his energy and closed the distance between them at a terrifying speed. Bode smiled. He threw a punch charged with lightning directly at him. Will spat blood and fell down. Idiot, said Bode, not even bothering to look in his direction. Obviously, I am also superior in hand-to-hand combat. My unique magic manipulates electricity. If I reinforce my own body and move at higher speed, the paralysis effect is nothing. Will lay on the ground thinking that even after all that, he still hadn't managed to win. So this is your defeat, said Bode, approaching again with his electrified fist raised. A sword appeared, pointing at him. Veronica was standing behind Bode, sword in hand, her voice firm. Enough! This has gone too far, Professor Wood. The professor let out a heavy, irritated sigh. Veronica, you shouldn't interfere. You are a new employee. The match has already been decided, he replied. Continuing will only serve to hurt him. This guy can heal his own wounds. He can keep going. Danny? Veronica did not back down. If he had magic to spare, sure, but he doesn't have any stamina left. He's just wasting my fighting spirit now. Veronica released her energy. Worry did the same. The two of them approached each other. Enough. The voice came from above. Alliram landed between them, floating for a moment before touching the ground. The two of you fighting here is really foolish, he said, looking straight at Ward. Stop this. The director's gaze left no room for argument. Ward looked away. Alright. Alniram turned to Veronica. I owe you an apology. I didn't explain the situation to you properly. He cleared his throat and straightened up. With this, the main event of the selection camp is over. Everyone can leave now. The students began to leave the Colosseum. Will tried to heal himself on the spot, but cursed his lack of magic. His recovery was barely progressing and he didn't want to accept it. Before he could keep pushing himself, Veronica picked him up in her arms. He froze in surprise. You did well, she said. Don't push yourself any funda. Will was left speechless for a moment. Then he nodded, turning her words over in his mind as he tried to believe them. It wasn't good enough. The night passed. He would stay awake thinking. That was the skill of a first-class offensive mage. It wasn't just raw power. The level of tactics was completely different, refined in a way he could barely keep up with. And even with people like that, humanity had still fallen. He needed to become stronger. In the morning, he knocked on the door and asked to come in. Well, finally, said Alniram, the wounds are fine, as expected. As soon as my power returns, I heal on my own, replied Will. So, participating in the training camp won't be a problem. You were the winner of the main event, so you'll be taking part. Besides, you, Sirius and Erica also passed. Will found. But Professor Vogt said everyone failed and I didn't win. Alniram gave a half smile. That happens every year. Alniram explained that this was done on purpose every year. Telling everyone that they had failed was a way to create a sense of urgency among the students and push them to their limits. In the end, most of them ended up passing anyway. Will found it strange at first, but it made sense when he thought about it more. In his past life, Vorde had been one of the heroes who fought on the front lines till the very end, defending humanity even in a world he did not agree with. That was just how he was. His way of being a good teacher, Alniram went on. Will would be assigned as an offensive mage in a group formed with students from other academies, and it would be expected that the group take on monster subjugation requests. It would be the first time since his regression that Will would face real monsters. 5 years after that moment, in his previous life, monsters had been the direct cause of humanity's destruction. Originally, monster was just a term for any creature with magical power, not necessarily hostile. Sometimes they attacked humans, but it was just survival instinct, natural competition. From an ecological point of view, they were neighbors who were not always aggressive. But in about 2 years, everything would change with the arrival of the Red Moon. The monsters would become more violent, start joining forces across species, and begin killing humans for no other reason than the desire to kill. 2 years after that, the Demon King would descend. Humanity quickly fell into disadvantage. The nations perished. Offensive mages, the most valuable on the battlefield, died one after another for all sorts of reasons. Knights, the same story. Even the healers, who usually stayed far from the front lines, were swallowed up by the collapse. Will lost his life. Hardly any of those who fought survived. In a few months, humanity would be on the verge of extinction. He could not allow that to happen again. He needed to become stronger than anyone who had ever existed in his previous life, to gather enough power to stop massive invasions and, if possible, to find out what had really caused the Red Moon. Alnaira looked at Will with a half smile. You have a lot of determination. The same eyes as the day we met. She said that Will would be fine and that the teachers were careful with the training field for a reason. There was something she wanted to tell him specifically. Will was not very sure what she meant by that. Outside, he found Erica and Veronica waiting. The three of them were talking when Will noticed more people approaching, Sirius and Professor Ward. Will mentioned that he had heard Ward's strict teaching style was because he cared a lot about his students. Ward came closer with a stern expression. I don't know what you're talking about. The weaklies who can't even land a hit on me have no reason to be arrogant. Will thought that the professor hadn't changed one bit. If you understood that, Ward continued, then work hard on the battlefield. Thank you for dealing with Sirius. I am grateful as well, replied Sirius. Will turned to him and said that he was still quite quiet. Sirius gave him a restrained smile. Thank you. Thanks to that, I was able to focus completely on training and become even stronger. That's Professor Vode's way of teaching. As long as you survive and manage to take your revenge, it's not a defeat. That's a good lesson, said Will. Become stronger. Sirius gave a genuine smile and bumped his fist with Will's before heading towards the carriage. Will thought that having more capable offensive mages was always a good thing and that it would ensure the battles against the monsters went in their favor. Veronica said it was time to leave. Will was already on his way. Inside the carriage, Veronica explained the mission, that Dunkel Forest was up ahead. This time, the request was to subdue the goblins in the forest. Each group would be made up of 3 students from different academies, Schwartz, Hallig and Sylvan, plus a teacher from one of the schools as support. Erica asked if the groups had already been decided. Veronica confirmed that Erica was in the same group as her. Erica thought that was better than being stuck with strangers, even if Veronica made her a bit uneasy. The teacher mentioned that Will's group also had something different about it, but that they had already arrived. It would be best to go and see the participants from Sylvan who were already there. Will knew who they were from his past life, but they had never been properly introduced. A girl called out his name, ran up to him and hugged him before he could react. I've been waiting for the day I could finally meet you. Will turned red on the spot. Wait a second, I have no idea who you are. The girl took a step back without seeming the least bit offended. That makes sense. After all, we've never properly introduced ourselves. She straightened up with a smile. My name is Marie Golgran, granddaughter of the headmaster of Schwartz Academy, Alneram Golgran. Will's jaw dropped. He stood still for a moment, processing it. So she was the girl he had looked after. He never imagined they would meet again. He asked her how she was, and Marie said she was doing very well. She apologized for not having thanked him properly before, but Will said it wasn't necessary. A grandfather had recommended him to Schwartz in return, so they were even. Marie shook her head. She also wanted to return the favor in some way. Since she didn't have any talent for magic, she enrolled in Sylvan and devoted herself to fencing. The result was that she reached the top of the academy's exams. Turns out I have a knack for the sword, she said, laughing. Will thought about it. Going from bedridden to first place in the exams in such a short time, she had an unbelievable talent. Marie took his hands firmly. You can count on me, Master Will. That's why we ended up in the same group. Will smiled and said that together they would do their best, and at that moment he understood what the headmaster meant when he said he was counting on him. Marie suddenly turned around and said that someone from Alto Lich had arrived and that they should go and greet them. Erika commented that their group seemed to be well put together, and Veronica agreed. The atmosphere was already good. Marie looked around, searching for the other members of the group. She asked if Master Ren and Turf had arrived yet. Will recognized the name. The door opened and a man appeared, asking everyone to be patient. They were heading out. He stopped outside and introduced himself as Master Ren, wanting to confirm if these were the students joining his group. Will felt something tighten in his chest. It was his mentor. In his previous life, this man had been his teacher and the best healer he had ever known. He celebrated inwardly to be in the same group. Behind Ren, a young man with a scholarly look appeared, complaining that the professor still hadn't come down properly. Marie identified him as Master Turf and introduced herself. Turf said it was a pleasure, but his eyes went straight to their joined hands. And you are? Turf asked in a tone that didn't do much to hide his disdain. Will de Schwartz, an offensive mage, murmured Turf. Ren stretched out without any ceremony and declared that this was his group. They could do whatever they wanted, he would be watching. Marie frowned, questioning that attitude. Will thought that this was exactly how his mentor had always been. He took a step towards Ren and asked if he could call him mentor. Ren raised an eyebrow, wanting to know why. Will explained that he could use healing magic, but he had never had a teacher for it and wanted to learn from him. Ren was surprised, an offensive mage who also used healing. He said he thought he had heard something about that and that the formation of the group seemed intentional. When Will asked if it was alright, Ren just shrugged. Call me whatever you like. Marie immediately said that if Master Will called him that, she would do the same. Turf tried to object, but it was useless. Erika and Veronica exchanged a glance. The group was already getting too friendly. Each team was given their designated area, with the cabin as the base. The goblins' territory was a bit deeper inside the forest. As was customary in combat, the healers did not go to the front but stayed at the base. Marie pointed out that Ren was a healer, but he was going to go ahead anyway. Ren replied that he was the supervisor, so it was different. They could do as they liked, he wouldn't be a burden. Marie said she would help him so that he wouldn't have to hold himself back. Will agreed that meant something. The goblins attacked and Marie swung the enormous sword with all her strength, sweeping through the enemies in wide arcs. Each blow landed with an absurd impact. When she landed, there was a heap of goblins collapsed around her. Will looked at her and thought of the girl who had lain in that bed and how she had come this far. Marie's swordsmanship was like that, every strike driven by sheer brute force. Maybe she alone could clear out this whole place. There's a big group of them over there, Ren warned, folding his arms. Impressive but full of please. Excellent for advancing, but when surrounded she is left exposed. Cover her, Will agreed and thought that he was finally going to fight real monsters. One of the goblins charged straight at Marie. Will thought that these goblins were truly formidable. That tension in your shoulders, said Ren, relax. Will was surprised, but he agreed. It was just like before. Ren always noticed too much. Then he activated the magic circle, followed immediately by physical enhancement, and moved. He jumped in among the monsters, slashing with his sword and covering Marie's back without any apparent effort. You can count on me, he said. Marie did not hesitate to accept. So this is what fighting with healing magic looks like, commented Ren from a distance. Not bad at all. Will celebrated inwardly. It worked against monsters too. The knife that Professor Veronica had given him had a different kind of strength compared to the Alpus blades. Cleaner and more precise. You extend yourself through explosive power and swordsmanship at the same time, said Marie. It's really impressive. That's enough for today, announced Ren as he was already walking. Let's move on. Marie mentioned that somehow she felt lighter. Will said it was thanks to his manga. Ren's healing magic had indicators for serious conditions, but his real skill was speed. So casual, so subtle that no one around noticed it had been used. That's why non-healers never understood how extraordinary it was. Will had asked about that once. I don't do it to show off, Ren had replied. If you're healed, that's all that matters. Will didn't say anything more, but he thought the world hadn't realized it. The best healer in the world was Ren Kairos. Later, in the group's cabin, Ren went over the day. Good loot. All of you did very well today. Everyone came back unharmed, so I didn't do anything, said Tuff. Providing healing through meals is also a healer's duty, replied Ren, and you did well. The taste was thanks to your special sauce. Marie said that the professor was truly amazing. He wasn't just a healer, he seemed to have knowledge of the front lines as well. When you treat many injured people in the field, basic knowledge naturally accumulates, said Ren. That's why the professor rarely attends regular classes, added Tuff. He's always going there, isn't it dangerous? Maria asked. I'm confident in my ability to run, replied Ren. Will continued eating in silence. He thought, he says that but he can't run away without saving people first. Losing his mentor had been a heavy blow for humanity, not only because he was an exceptional healer, but also because he was the only one who knew what to do in combat. Fate could change for him and for the others, but there was still some time left before that incident. Will looked at his plate and finished his soup. In this life, he was not gonna let his mentor die. The group continued enjoying the evening together. In the forest, the goblins gathered around an unknown figure. He offered them the power of the Red Moon. The goblins started becoming violent. A giant goblin moved towards the group. The next day, they subdued the monsters again. They exchanged thoughts about the previous battle and their teamwork improved noticeably. At the pace they were going, they would finish the next day. They kept moving forward. Ren stopped suddenly. Let's go back. Why? Maria sound? We haven't come across any monsters yet. That's exactly it, said the professor. There are no signs of anything. The goblins have a strong sense of territory. When outsiders approach, they advance just like they did yesterday. We walked far enough and haven't found any. What's going on? He asked. I don't know. But on the battlefield, trust your instincts. We'll head back for today, and when we get there, we'll call another group to join us. I trust Professor Veronica's group, said Marie. They have a base nearby. Well informed, said Ren. Let's go there. Will stayed behind while the others moved ahead. That behavior, unusual for the goblins, seemed fishy. Marie shouted that they were close to the road leading to the neighboring base. Will tried not to think about his past life. He knew he couldn't, but what appeared before him wiped out all thought. Erica was there, her hands tied with a rope, completely unconscious. Marie moved forward without hesitation, saying she was going to save her, but the ground gave way strangely beneath her feet. A trap! She drew her sword by instinct and stabbed it into the ground before she could fall completely, holding on tightly. Even so, she warned the others to be careful. It was a trap and they had used Erica as bait. More are coming, shouted Aang. Arrows sliced through the air towards the group. Will intercepted all of them with his knife before they could land. The goblins charged immediately after, their red eyes shining, ready to fight. Marie climbed out of the pit while Will assessed the situation. They were surrounded by dozens of them. It was all too coordinated. The movements reminded him of the Red Moon, but it wasn't supposed to appear for another 2 years. Will felt his stomach tighten. Was a tragedy already unfolding? Erica groaned and moved slightly. She was still alive. This was not the time to think about it, but just knowing it was enough to steady Will. There are many of them, said Marie. At least she is alive. Will catch the ground. Leave it to me. Roots burst out around the group, forming wooden guardians that blocked the goblins from all sides. Will told Murray that she didn't need to stay on the front line. With the archers behind the fight, it would be easier to find openings. He could prepare himself properly. Murray stood firm and let everything loose at once, breaking the enemy formation with a powerful blow. "What do you think?" she asked, satisfied. A goblin tried to attack her from behind. He would strike the monster on the neck before it could reach her. "I'll cover the gaps." "Great job, you two," said Ren. "I'll go rescue the young lady." "Go," replied Will. But something was wrong. A heavyweight settled on his chest before he even understood why. He already knew that the effect of the red moon made monsters violent. What he didn't expect was what began to emerge from the ground, an ogre. It had been hiding underground, and the red moon made creatures of different species act together. Will realized that he was too far away to help. It was just like his previous life. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't protect everyone at the same time. The ogre's fist came crashing down towards Ren. Ren focused his magic and used physical enhancements to dodge the blow at the very last second. Will stood still for a moment. His mentor had learned the offensive healing magic that he had taught him. The ogre turned and tried another strike. Ren dug down, leapt with all his might, and landed behind the monster's head. "Good night," he said. Ren struck the ogre with a mental sop. The creature lost consciousness and crashed to the ground with a dull thud as the mentor landed lightly behind it. Will came closer and commented on the move he had just witnessed. Ren replied that a good mentor also learns from his student. Will said that was exactly what he expected from him, and Murray declared that it had been amazing. Ren began to untie Erica and warned her that they should leave while they still could. Will considered that, with the mentor's strength, they could probably handle everyone present. The wooden golems were still holding the line. Ren told him to stop being an idiot. He had only put the ogre to sleep. He was a healer, and even though it was a monster, he had no intention of hurting the creature. Once the effect wore off, the ogre would be fine. Will said that was exactly the person he knew. They made their way through the goblins and ran. After defeating a few pursuers, the monster seemed to give up the chase. Will said that they could catch their breath there. Ren used his healing magic and asked Erica to wake up. Little by little, she regained consciousness, disoriented, asking where she was. Murray told her that she was safe. Will apologized for asking right after she woke up, but he needed to know what had happened and why she had been alone. Erica held her head, trying to gather her thoughts. She remembered that the subjugation the previous day had gone well, but they hadn't been able to eliminate all of them. When the group was regrouping, something went wrong. Professor Veronica had disappeared. Will asked about that, and Erica confirmed it. Veronica had left them a note asking them to wait, saying she would be back soon, but Erica became anxious and, in the middle of an argument with the other two, ended up going after her. Will supposed that was exactly what the others must have told her, and she hadn't been able to say no. There was nothing funny about the situation. One wrong move and the girl could have lost her life. None of them was prepared to deal with that class difference. Erica said that as soon as she entered the forest, she smelled something sweet. The next thing she remembered was now. Ren noticed that the goblins had some kind of sleeping drug. The trap, combined with the fact that they were working alongside the ogre, was strange. But there was no time to analyze that now. Their base had to be nearby and they needed to regroup with the other two. On the way back, Erica asked them to stop. She stood still, looking ahead with a surprised expression. The base had been destroyed. Murray said she had thought about this before. Goblins are extremely territorial and normally do not leave their own territory, so being further away should have been safe, but now she wanted to understand the reason behind this. Will reflected that proactive attacks against humans were a trait of monsters during the Red Moon, but there was no way to explain it at this moment. Ren noticed that there were no signs of a struggle, which meant that the two had fled somewhere. He was gonna look for them. Will, Erica and Murray should join the territory and leave the forest. The group agreed without any hesitation. Ren also warned them not to assume that the base was safe and to stay alert. The group ran back quickly. Will asked if Turf was alright. The boy replied that dinner was not ready yet. Murray thanked him for being safe and sound, and Turf turned red. Will said he would explain everything later, but that they had to leave now. Then he turned around and noticed something. He slowly clenched his fist. The ogre was standing in front of the house. It had followed them. Erica panicked and asked what they would do. Will said quietly that he was only now realizing how pathetic he had been until now. Erica did not understand what he meant. Will replied that he was going to defeat that ogre and that he believed they could win. Against a horde of that size, teamwork would be essential. Marie should not push herself like before. She only needed to land the right blows, leaving the front line to the wooden golems. Erica should hold back the goblins in front with her flames. The girl said bitterly that someone like her had been captured so easily. Will said that her flames were very useful. Erica was surprised by the compliment and swallowed hard before acting. She unleashed a burst of fire at the goblins. A wall of flames formed in front of them, and the monster stopped retreating out of fear of the heat. Erica clapped her hands in relief. It had worked. But Will noticed that something was wrong. The ogre was passing through the barrier. Unlike the goblins, that monster was on a completely different level. Will ordered a wooden golem to approach and shouted to Erica to use her flames. She obeyed. The golem wrapped itself around the ogre and caught fire along with it. The monster let out a cry of pain. Will called out to Marie as he moved forward. She understood without needing any further explanation. She used all her strength and threw the ogre. The monster crashed to the ground with a loud noise. Marie said it had been excellent teamwork. Will agreed, but the relief did not last. The ogre got back up again. The cut on its stomach was already closing up. The flesh was regenerating right before their eyes. Marie asked if they should keep attacking until the regeneration stopped. Will said no. There was no guarantee they could finish it off that way. They needed the right method. Before he could think further, Erica warned that something was coming. Will raised his knife and blocked the impact. The ogre was throwing goblins like projectiles. Will took down the ones that reached him, muttering that they were rather troublesome projectiles. Erica warned that more were coming. Marie deflected a goblin with her sword, saying firmly that she would return the favor, and hurled the monster back. Then she said that Will seemed to have a plan, so they would take care of the goblins. Will moved forward, saying he was counting on them. The group split up. Erica and the wooden golems held back the horde of goblins with area attacks. Marie was dealing with the ones thrown by the ogre. Will went straight for the ogre. The monster looked down and swung its claws in a low blow. Will dodged it and responded with several quick slashes from his dagger. The ogre became even more enraged. It let out a roar and the cuts began to close up. Will appeared behind the monster. He said they were full of gaps, but that was the point. He pressed his hand against the ogre's nape and activated the life overload. The monster's heart began to convulse. An agonizing sensation took hold of its body. The ogre even screamed in fear before exploding from the inside out. Will climbed down from the remains with a smile on his face. It made sense. The ogre's regeneration worked quite well, but the life overload had destroyed the body from within. Without a body, there was nothing left to regenerate. He said that now only the goblins were left. It didn't take much time. Will separated one from the group, the head hit the ground, and finally everything was over. Marie declared it a complete victory and hugged both of them. The protagonist nodded and praised the group's coordination. Erica still didn't quite understand how they had managed it. Will said it wasn't the time to celebrate. The others were still in danger. That was when a gust of wind swept through the forest. The protagonist recognized it immediately. It was Sirius. If they followed that tornado, they could regroup with the other teams. Sirius stood still, unmoving after using his power. Will assessed the situation and concluded that it was alright. The protagonist nodded, relieved that everyone had come out unscathed. Then Bode caught their attention. He wanted to know what was up with that strange group composition and where the instructor and the others were. Ren appeared and replied that they were there. Will ran towards the teacher and told him that he had found both of them. Ren replied that the tornado had helped quite a bit. It drew enough attention for them to be located. He said that Will had done well using it and that he was glad no one had been hurt. Erica laughed. Bode noticed that the mood was good, but someone was missing. Will confirmed Professor Veronica's. Bode said he wasn't worried about her, but that they couldn't leave without at least informing her. Ren announced that he would continue to keep an eye on the remaining students and asked if the other teacher could handle the group while they split up. The teacher said yes. Sirius and Will would go out to look for Veronica. The protagonist tried to expand his hearing to track living presences, but he still hadn't practiced enough to distinguish them accurately. He would have to do it the old-fashioned way. It didn't take long. He found Veronica and she was still alright, but something was wrong. She had a red moon crystal in her hands and then looked back. Will became tense. It was the same light as before. The professor put the crystal in his pocket and asked her what she was doing there. Will denied any suspicion. He said he was looking for her, that the monsters had been behaving strangely and apparently the training had come to an end. Veronica said she understood and that they would return now. Will asked her to wait. He wanted to know what that stone was. The professor replied that it was nothing. He pressed further. He wanted to know what she had been doing all that time, leaving the other students behind. He asked her to answer him. Veronica opened her mouth. She said she was sorry, but that she was not usually open about her methods and that he would do well to keep quiet about it. Will sighed, sensing her aura. The professor told him not to worry, that she was not going to do anything wrong. He couldn't say anything more. He tried to push further, but he didn't have enough strength for it. And more than that, he was not ready to suspect Professor Veronica. In his previous life, she had been his companion, so the training camp came to an end. That night, Will could not sleep. He kept wondering if Veronica was involved with the Red Moon. In his previous life, she had never been like this. So he watched her from a distance and noticed that she was talking to another professor. He activated his presence concealment and carefully approached. The other professor said that he had received a request to leave the campus and wanted to know where she was going. Veronica walked away, saying it was personal. Will thought about it. Maybe she was going to do something related to the red stone. He had no choice. He had to follow her. Veronica walked through the city. Will followed her. He knew he had left without thinking it through. If he was wrong, he was nothing more than a stalker, but he just couldn't ignore that worry. Not when there was a real chance to learn something before the tragedy repeated itself. And if there was any way to clear Veronica's name, he needed to find it out. It was the first time Will had returned to that city since his previous life. After graduating from Helix Academy, the spread of monsters had become a serious problem, and he was sent straight to the battlefield without any time for anything else. At least that's what he could remember. Veronica stopped at a stall and bought a small bun from an old man. Will looked on and something stirred inside him. The memory of having eaten that together with her. Almost without thinking, he bought one as well and took a bite. It was really good. Veronica smiled and said that place was amazing. Will mentioned that he was from out of town and had never bought street food like that before. He asked her if she did it often because she had grown up in a family of traders. She confirmed it but explained that it was more than just that. With everything that could happen, she had set a rule for herself. Every time she saw a bakery, she would go in. It had started during travels with her parents when she was a child, and later, as an adult, leading campaigns on the battlefield, she met many people. She never saw most of them a second time, and even when she did meet someone again, that person had changed so much they were almost a stranger. She didn't want to carry regrets, so she had given up on the idea of leaving things for later. Will said that made sense. That's why she got along so well with everyone. Back in the present, she pressed her own hand against her chest. In the end, she let Veronica die. This time would be different, and for that she needed to discover the truth with her own eyes. Veronica entered an alley. Will continued following her, keeping his distance. He realized he was becoming too obvious and strengthened his concealment of presence. At the end of the alley, Veronica stopped in front of someone. The person said they had been waiting for her, apologized for the place, and stated that it was an important matter. Then they pulled down their hood and said it was time to talk about the point they had agreed upon. Veronica took the stone out of her pocket and handed it over. The man held it with both hands and remained motionless for a moment. Then he burst out in barely contained emotion. He exclaimed that it was simply extraordinary, that she had a remarkable talent, exactly as he had always believed. With this, the church's wish could finally be fulfilled. They would bring the red moon even closer. Will felt the weight of those words. So that was it. Everything was connected, the red moon, the stone, the church, but his attention drifted away. The concealment of the present began to crumble. Veronica noticed it immediately and turned around with her sword already in hand. Will barely had time to react to the strike. He could only shout her aim. Veronica said that he had followed her. She was standing in front of him in a guarded stance. The man behind her commented in a tone of calculated disappointment that he had asked her to come alone. He said he regretted that she had broken the agreement as he truly believed he would gain a new companion for the order. Veronica replied firmly that he should consider it an accident. The man said that it was alright. In that case, he would let her handle the matter and the order would still welcome her. Will waited tensely for a response. Veronica refused. She said she was only there to investigate and had no intention whatsoever of sacrificing a student. Will said he was sorry but he needed to understand what was going on. Veronica sighed and admitted that the mistake had been hers. She should have explained things earlier. That day in the forest, she had felt something strange. What she had found that day was a monster in a state of madness and near it a red stone. Veronica described the strange feeling she had when she held it. When she channeled magic into the stone, it emitted an intense red light. It was then that the man approached and remarked that finding someone with that kind of potential in a place like this must have been the work of a higher order. She wanted to prove that the mission had been worth it, but Veronica wanted to know who he was. The man said he would have liked to talk more, but there were rules. If she wanted to understand what the stone was, she would have to accept two conditions: to keep the stone shining with light, which would serve as proof of qualification, and not to tell anyone about the place she would be directed to. He said he was sorry for having put her through such a test, but that he truly hoped to see her among them. That is why Veronica had gone there to investigate. She thought that understanding what was happening was better than letting something bad happen without knowing the cause. Will said that the explanation was still incomplete. Veronica agreed and apologized, but Will replied that he felt relieved. Clearly, he was not a bad person. The man sighed, saying that his declaration of interest in the order had been a lie and that this saddened him. He threw the stone and remarked that it was not like him to discard someone with so much talent. Will recognized the stone in the hair. It was the same one that Veronica had received near the water, but before anyone could react, it began to shine. The monsters around them went into a frenzy at that very moment and 8 dragons emerged from the water. The man watched in admiration and said that even among the members of the order, those who could awaken so much power were rare. Those water dragons were exceptionally strong. Veronica counted 8. Will said he could handle half of them. She refused even before he finished the sentence. That wouldn't be necessary. Veronica stepped forward with her magic sword and cut off all 8 heads at once. Will murmured that this was just what he expected from her, but the teacher didn't let her guard down, keeping her eyes on the dragons. The heads hit the ground and then started moving. Will asked her if he was seeing it right. Veronica confirmed it. The dragons were still alive, even after. He wanted to understand what kind of regeneration was that. Able to survive without a head and without any healing magic. Something was wrong there. One of the dragons came straight at Will. He stepped aside and drew his knife, striking the creature's body. He already knew how tough that skin was. Will grabbed the dragon and said he needed to test the theory that he would go ahead with this one. Veronica said she understood but told him not to push himself too much. Will replied that he would be quick. He released the physical limit of his body and pushed forward with all the strength in his legs. He grabbed the dragon's head with both hands and pulled with everything he had. What came out was not a head, it was a tentacle, it was a kraken. Veronica understood immediately. It wasn't the head regenerating because to begin with, it had never been a head. That was an octo-dragon, soft-bodied, deceptive in appearance. The monster spoke. It said that Will had discovered its true form in an instant, and that was impressive. The order did not assess combat ability, so he couldn't eliminate it there. At that point, he would act against its wishes anyway. It introduced itself as Alrund and declared that it would take down both of them with its own hands. Will looked at Veronica and asked her if she could handle the monster. The magic of a sword would probably be more effective against that kind of creature than anything he could do. Veronica said she would follow her calling, but she couldn't put a student in danger. Will took her hand activated physical enhancement, and said he would return after covering the entire route. She just needed to keep herself safe until then. Veronica smiled, calling him a reckless student. Then she turned and said it was fine, but he had to be careful about one thing. That man probably had something extra up his sleeve. Will was surprised. He went on to say that he had already shown it wasn't impossible. Moving forward, Alrun remarked that he was very fast and then touched his chest, saying that he was too. Will lunged with the knife and the mage blocked with his staff. Will hadn't expected that. Alrun said it seemed he had talent in everything. Both of them stepped back, repositioning themselves for the duel. The mage noticed that he had received a cut on his face. It hurt, but he could heal it. Veronica watched from a distance and explained the red stone emitted a passive flow of mana that seemed like offensive magic. In other words, Alrun was a healer who could fight. Will asked how he knew combat methods for healing magic. Alrun replied that of course not, but by watching someone like Will in action, he was able to learn, as if Will himself were his teacher. Will thought that this once existed as a combat method for healers. He wanted to know how far these people had come. Alrun said that at this point, it was clear that Will had been talented from the very beginning and that he was quite envious. He would love to meet the person who had taught him. He asked Will what he thought if he had any interest in joining the order. Will said he must be joking. He would never become one of those pieces of rubbish, not even if he were reborn. The healing magic in his hands took on a reddish hue. Alrun was surprised. Then he said it was a pity. He moved towards Will, declaring that he would finish him off right there. Will, blocked with the dagger, thought that Alrun's physical enhancement was strong. The order, the redstone, the healing magic combined with offensive magic, there were many things he still didn't understand, but he would get all the answers from this man, and perhaps, somehow, he might be able to prevent the tragedy. He deflected Alrun's staff, spun with the same movement, and kicked the mage away. Alrun steadied himself on his staff and admitted that at this rate he would actually lose, but said that he had the order behind him. He activated something, bodily corruption. One of his eyes turned red like a fox's. His arm began to deform, twisting into a monstrous shape. Alrun said it was absolutely magnificent. Will thought that this went far beyond any normal physical enhancement with healing magic. He wanted to know from whom Alrun had learned it. The mage replied that everything came from the teachings of the order. Before that, he had lived a boring life without thinking about anything. He was a healer hired by magical units, following orders from arrogant people. Each day was same as the last. But as a healer, he also knew how to observe, and what he saw was a world full of people who did not deserve to be saved. The order gave them power and awakening, so Alrun's life had finally begun to shine. Will said that he did not know what Alrun had realized, but what he was doing was wrong. If he continued like this, many people would lose their lives. Alrun struck his deformed muscle and replied that everything was fine. The order said it had to be this way. Then he threw Will forcefully to the other side of the alley. Will hit the wall and coughed up blood. Alrun walked towards him, declaring that justice always prevails. Will thought that because of an empty shell like him, his younger brother, teacher Veronica, and so many others had lost their lives. Alrun stopped, surprised. He wanted to know how Will was still standing with so much accumulated damage, but there was something different about him. Will began to heal his own arm. The wounds closed almost instantly. Alrun couldn't believe it. Every wound had healed within seconds. What kind of recovery was that? Will said he would never forgive Alrun and that he would make him suffer something worse than death. Alrun attacked, saying he would take Will's life too quickly for him to have any chance to heal. Will moved at the same time, striking the monstrous arm with everything he had. Alrun was thrown back by the impact. Will told him not to start screaming over that because it wasn't even close to being over. Alred had barely processed the idea that Will was moving too fast when a hook landed cleanly on his jaw. He flew backwards, got stuck on the alley roof and fell to the ground, completely knocked out. Will looked at the motionless body and said Alrod was already unconscious. He would deal with him later. Then he turned towards Master Veronica, who was still facing the Kraken. He focused and unleashed a massive slash with his sword, the flash magic. The creature was split in two and each piece fell to the ground like slices of sushi. Veronica noticed that Will seemed to have finished as well. The monster's regeneration was strong, so it took some time. Will agreed that the Kraken had been a tough opponent, but immediately after, he turned around, struck Ulrut hard in the face and pushed his body against the wall. He pressed the knife against the mage's face and said that he was going to answer some questions. He replied that so be it then and asked Will not to make that scary face. Will said that depended on him. He had a lot to ask. He wanted to know what the cult was and what its objective was. Ulrut said that a true believer never leaks information to outsiders. Then he pressed his own dagger against his neck and declared that he would dedicate his life to the cult. He wished long life to the cult and took his own life. Will was left frozen. Ulrut cried, saying that he had sacrificed himself to protect the cult's secrets. He was a perfect believer. With that, his soul would be guided to the world of Lord Claudius's desires. But then, Ulrut's mind began to clear. He realized that the wound had disappeared. Ulrut murmured in confusion. He was certain that he had struck his own windpipe. The pain from the cold shoulder. Will said he was surprised when Ulrut did that. He had underestimated his faith, but he was able to heal him. Ulrut said it was impossible that he had died. Will replied that even so, he could be healed. Ulrut insisted that it was impossible for any normal healer. Will said that he was not normal and that in the future he would be the best healer in the world. Then he let the threat hang in the air. If he could heal someone on the verge of death, he could also hurt someone to that point and heal them again as many times as necessary. Ulrut understood what that meant and was terrified. Will asked him if he was ready to talk. Ulrut thought he had no other choice, but before he could open his mouth, something took hold of his mind. A voice ordered him to die. Panic spread across Ulrut's face. He fell to the ground crying with no control over his own body. Will stepped back in surprise. The man was dying on his own. Veronica shouted at him to move away. Something was wrong. Will obeyed. Alrat's body began to dissolve into smoke. Both of them covered their faces with their arms while the remains rotted on the ground. Will ran towards what was left and tried to heal him, telling him to hold on, but it was useless. All of Ruth's life force had been wiped out in an instant. Some kind of powerful curse, too strong to reverse. Will murmured, wondering who was behind that cult. Veronica asked him if he was alright. Will confirmed that he was, but complained that he had lost the only chance to get information and that it was his fault. Veronica said that it was enough that the student was alive and that it was time to return to the academy. On the way back, Will mentioned that the red stone had been destroyed out of nowhere. Veronica said that the cult and the red stone were too dangerous. Just knowing that they existed was unsettling and they needed to be careful. Will agreed, thinking that compared to his previous life, he was making progress, but wondered if it would be enough. Veronica said that in the end she was glad that he had also gone out into the field. She had pressured the principal to make that happen, and it was thanks to Will that she had noticed something. Will understood it. Veronica had only noticed his existence in this life. So he took the opportunity to ask why she kept using mana to attack even though she was a healer. Veronica said that she came from a family of merchants and had always had many opportunities to interact with healers and attack mages. Maybe that was the reason. Will said that if that were enough, mana research would already be much more advanced. Veronica admitted that she couldn't explain it properly. It was as if someone had told her something when she was young, a vague feeling that was hard to pin down. Will wondered if that person might have some connection to the sect. Veronica changed the topic and asked him if he wanted to have some bread. Will was left speechless for a moment and then agreed. Even with so many mysteries still unresolved, Will had managed to find a clue to move away from the destruction he knew. Of course, he was also punished for going out without permission. Elsewhere, in a noble mansion, a man died quickly. There was a vampire bite mark on his neck. A voice asked her if he had died and said that now it would come for her. The woman sighed. She said she would do it if it was an order from the sect.